Hello, dear perceptive souls. This is Bevin Niemann, and I am coming to you today on the day of the solar eclipse, which is June 20th, 2020. Most of my readings are not date or time specific, but this morning the energy of this eclipsing of the sun by the moon just really came through so strongly. There were so many messages, and you may just want to get like a nice cup of tea or whatever that is that you want to drink and just settle in, because this is going to be a little longer reading. There were so many different layers and perspectives and stories and timelines and narratives that wanted to come through. So I'm just going to take it at a pace that is sustainable, and I hope this is really helpful for you as I explore this internally as well. So when we think about an eclipse, at first I wanted to share with you, my teas always have a little tag, and this one says, "There is pleasure in the pathless woods." And this is credited to Lord Byron. And the pathless woods would be where, you know, it's not the mainstream. It's not the well-traveled path, but you're literally hacking and cutting and stepping around and stepping under and just really getting into the wildness. And I think that you will see that's, you know, a tendency of who I am is to do the pathless travel. So let's get on with it. When we think about the eclipse, we think about the moon moving in conjunction with the sun, imprinting the feminine onto the masculine. We still have that corona, that ring around that shines through. But I can say definitively that we have been taking a really deep dive into the feminine energy in 2020. You know, with the coronavirus, with being sheltered in place at home, going within, focusing on the family, on children, on each other, on doing that deep inner work. Everyone I've talked to said that they have had revelations, they've had understandings of themselves that they could not get when we were out in the world being active all the time. So when we bring the deeply nurturing, intuitive, emotional sphere over the top of the outward pouring, doing, producing energy, we actually create alchemy, right? And we're going to talk about alchemy a little later on in this reading. It was a very strong energy that came up, and I'll tie that in. What we're experiencing right now is the changing from one era of human consciousness into another. And many people have talked about moving from the age of Pisces, which is a duality, right? Even the symbolism is the two fishes, and the fishes are material beings. They're down in the water, they're swimming. The Piscean age has been really about exploring this duality, the polarities, if you will. We've been exploring black and white. We've been exploring male and female. We've been exploring the haves and the have-nots. I could go on and on and on about all the ways that we explore duality in this current expression that we find ourselves. And yet, that is coming to an end. That's felt really familiar, right? To have two political parties or two different religious ways of seeing the world, or just so many ways that we look at life as either this or that. And what we've tended to do at the end of this era is really come into this energy of, here's where I stand in that polarity, and there's where you stand, and here's me, and you are other. And if if I admit that you might have some validity, that your way of being, your way of thinking, your way of doing might have some validity, then does that make me wrong for mine? And this has been what we've seen a lot of, this exploration out on social media and in our communities and our workplaces, and just an exploration of, you know, is it this or that? And what I'll suggest, because the first card that came out was the Totemic Puma, and this one has been coming out quite a bit lately. And the way that I interpret this is power awakening, right? And so much about the age of Pisces has been an exploration of our relationship to power. Whether we take power over others, we need to control, to manipulate, to have power over, to make people conform to our way of being, our way of thinking, or whether we source power from within. And we stand strong and sure in who we are, regardless, and we affirm that other people get to stand strong and firm in who they are, regardless. So we have the three energy here. So there's me, there's you, and then there is the space in between us, right? Which we can either make an enormous distance, or we can say that space between us is where all the magic happens, where everything gets alchemized, right? Where we start to have some beautiful realizations. And in the past, this has really been an energy about power over. And so we look at narratives that are out there going around the internet, and they've been going around for years. And really we talk about the battle of good versus evil. You could talk about that in terms of God and the devil. You could talk about that in terms of the cabal or the Illuminati, or those who are, you know, working against them. You could talk about this in terms of the small percentage of people who have a lot of money and a lot of power to run everything at a government level, or through our corporations, and then those who are the workers. There's lots of ways that we have explored throughout the Piscean era this power dynamic. And what I'll say about that is, if we take a little higher perspective, we lift the Puma up, and we start to explore, what does it mean to source power from within? To not need to be fragile, to not need to get our ego crushed because someone else is equally as strong, or equally as successful, or equally as sure of themselves as we are. Because we've mistaken, you know, we've mistaken the idea of the Piscean era to be that it has to be me or them. You know, we brought in these ideas of survival of the fittest. There's so many things that came through. Supposedly the Piscean era was initiated with the coming of Christ to the earth, right? And this idea was that during that time period, we had been in that Aries energy to a great degree, really about warring, and we were really still exploring power at that point. And this idea that was brought in by Jesus through the Christ consciousness was really about that we have a direct connection to all that is, to what is greater than ourselves. At the time, they knew to call that the Father, right? This is a very masculine energy. You know, now people call it universe, source, all that is, consciousness. You know, there's lots of words that we use. And some people get upset because we're using lots of words, and that's okay too. But this is all a part of us moving from the Piscean era into the age of Aquarius. And it doesn't mean that we have to leave behind any tradition or any belief system necessarily that we've held. Perhaps it's just about looking at it in a different way. So when the Christ consciousness came to earth, it was at a time when we really needed to explore what it meant to be in unity consciousness, in love, that all beings were equal, that we are to respect and love each other and work together in brotherhood and sisterhood. And yet because we were still in this place as human beings of exploring power, that teaching, which originally was supposed to be about unification, you see like this beautiful butterfly opening right here, and it was supposed to be about transformation. It was supposed to bring the essence of love to earth, and in many ways it did. In many ways it did. I would say that throughout our evolution, we are closer to that love consciousness than we have ever been. And we continue to move closer to that. There are some who came here throughout history to explore their relationship with power. And some of them used that wisely, and some of them did not. And we see that even today. We see that today with our politicians. We see that today with people who are at the head of corporations. We see that today, not only at that level, but in our individual level. So when we start to realize that what's reflected out there is also reflected within, then we begin to go within and we say, well, what is my personal relationship to power? Where have I been trying to take power over others to make them be the way that I want them to be? Or where am I sourcing my power from within? And I'm doing my own inner work. I'm standing in my own truth and allowing other people, not allowing, but like affirming that other people have the right to do that as well. And that's where this beautiful space in between gets created. So what came up next, just to support this, is the scales of balance. And for my Libra friends out there, you'll understand what this is. It's like, okay, well, if I put something on this one, or I put something on this one, then it'll tip or it'll change. And like, how do I get this in balance, right? And so we think that, with the Piscean air, we thought it had to be one thing or the other, but it was really meant to be this balance point. We're standing and we're holding that balance point. You see her, and she's focusing. Are we ever really going to get completely in balance? Well, maybe, possibly. But if you've ever, looked at your own life balance, you've looked at your relationship between work, between home, your relationship to your health versus your relationship to doing things in the world, all of these things, it's kind of like we're always putting a little bit over here, and then it tips a little bit, and we're putting something over here, and we're just working towards that to learn how to do this. And in this kind of older narrative that we've been living in for a really long time, there are two players, right? There are two players. So we have the guardians and we have the shadow. Again, this could be God and the devil. This could be, our lower shadow side, our higher enlightened side. There's lots of ways that we could look at this, right? We like this idea of guardianship, right? The idea that there's guardians. There's someone there protecting us, someone who's watching out for us. That, what if it were that, we came here and, man, this is our responsibility. But, it's like, so it's nice to have this, right? And I have been in this energy as well. I feel my ancestor spirits. I feel those who've passed on from the other side. And it is nice to know that they're there. I don't really see them as guardians, though. I see them more as witnesses, right? Because, we have free will on this plane, and we are meant to express and explore and do whatever it is that we are here to do, and they are just watching. I don't believe they're actually interfering with that. And I also believe that, we have this part of ourselves, right? I don't necessarily believe personally, and you can believe whatever you want, that there is evil and there's a devil and we'll go to hell. I haven't ever believed in that, even though I grew up as in the Christian church. That just never resonated with me, ever. And it's okay if it resonates with you. I'm not trying to make you wrong for that, but just hear out my perspective. We all have this shadow part, and we don't like to look at this. It's evil, it's bad, it's something that's not of me, it's something over there, it's something else. When in fact, we've all had this part. We've all had a part where we're not honest with ourselves or others, when we did something that was maybe lower vibrational, when we did something from an unconscious place because we were wounded inside. We all have this part, right? So we've made this part bad. We've made this part wrong. And really what we're being invited to in this new era is to integrate. is to integrate the part of ourselves that is the angel and is the devil, and to really just integrate that, you know, into a wholeness, right? So this part of ourselves where we're conscious and we're making good choices and we're treating people kindly and we're going through the earth and we're sourcing our power from within, and we have these places where we try to take control and power over others, or we over control ourselves inside, or we, you know, think things, we have mindsets and habits and patterns. And this is, and really what it's about in this new era is the integration of those and the acceptance of those, right? So the narrative has been, here's the king on the throne, you know, the supreme ruler, and then there's good versus evil, and this person is going to make a choice about who they give their cup to, right? Who they give their cup to. And there's only so much, you know, you can see here, there's like water coming down, and there's only so much to water this plant. So this has been kind of a scarcity mentality that we've been in through this Piscean era, that, you know, if someone else gets something, then I get less. And we see that a lot going on right now with racism. You know, if Black people and Indigenous people and people of color have more financial opportunities, if they have, you know, more opportunity and equal opportunity to participate in our society, then that's somehow going to detract from my opportunities. I won't get the job because they'll give it to someone else who is a person of color. You know, and we see all of these narratives kind of playing out, and this is the old version of the consciousness that's on our planet. And yet what came through was perception. So we realize as we look around and we see all this arguing and all this debating and all this struggle and everyone trying to take power, and we realize, you know what, that's not working. I mean, just quite frankly, like, look at it, it's not working. Our economic system isn't working. Our healthcare system isn't working. Most of our society isn't working for people who are in a minority culture or way of being. It's just not working. Like, we're in the point now where we're cutting through to the truth. We're like, yeah, that's not working. And this is really like integrating that shadow side, right? Perception is the ability eventually to take off that mask and just really look at what is. And that actually came up a couple of times in this reading. And as we do that, we start to have truths unveiled, right? So some people look at truth, and I have a really interesting relationship with truth, because I don't think there is actually an absolute truth. I think there's only subjective truth. You have a truth and I have a truth. I don't even have a truth. I just have a belief. But I'm going to go here with this one. And it says, you know, the revelation. This is the revelation, right? It's like we're going within. We're going, wait a minute. My way of being on an individual level, the collective way of being is not working. There's this revelation, like we start to get a light, right? Here we have like someone in a mask again, like there's someone in a mask. Kind of reminds me of a donkey. It's like, okay, have we in fact sort of made an ass of ourselves? You know, I think one of the most important things as a spiritual seeker is to be able to laugh at our fallacies, right? When we get really like, okay, this is, you know, this is who I am, and, you know, and we get into that ego place. But when we release some of that and we're able to laugh at ourselves and be like, yeah, we've kind of made an ass of things, and it's okay. There's nothing going wrong here. This is the process and the evolution that we have to go through. For all we know, every civilization, if there are other civilizations on other planets, goes through a very similar unfolding that we're going through. So we are in maybe stage, I don't know, 800, and if someone who are more advanced than us were looking down on us, they could say, yeah, they're in stage 800. Yeah, we were there a couple hundred years ago, and we understand what that looks like, and here's what'll probably happen next. But we can't see that because we're in the middle of it, right? Like, so we can only see and imagine where we are. We can only see and imagine where we are. But this is about the truths being unveiled, and there's a lot of truths being unveiled. Anywhere where someone has been holding power over, in whatever way that looks like, people are calling it out now. People are saying that's not acceptable. You know, that's not the way we want to live. We're moving towards this unity consciousness. It's really uncomfortable. And in that, we have to use a lot of discernment, right? Because there's all kinds of stories and narratives rolling around out there in the social media world. And when we look out there, we sense in and we say, okay, if I get quiet, what do I really know about that? So here's, the facts as they're presented by one group, and here's the facts as they're presented by another. And maybe there's this cabal and there's an Illuminati and they're trying to take over the earth and have control over things and control population. And then there's this other group of people who are fighting against them. And then there's this other faction and this other faction. And we're like, okay. So if I lift up above all of that and I start to realize that, oh, we're just expressing the final last gasps of the Piscean era. And this is all valuable information, a valuable part of our human evolution. Then I can start to use discernment. I don't get down into the stories, right? We've been down in the stories for a really long time. We've been in the story of good and evil. We've been in the story of us and them. We've been in the story of duality for a really long time. And those of us that are starting to help be, for lack of a term, way showers and hospitality of going into this new era, because we'll talk about the Aquarian era. It is important for us to watch all of that, but not get embroiled in all of that. And I'll say that a couple of years ago, I took this really deep dive into conspiracy theories. I'm just a curious person. I was like, okay, I want to know, what all of that is. I want to know what people believe. And then I sat there really from that mind of discernment. I didn't just go, yep, that has to be the truth. And I read and I watch and I listen to all different things. Even people that I know that I don't fundamentally agree with, I watch and I listen for as long as I can. And then I'm like, ooh, that's really fear-based energy. It's really, really like stirring up the shadow. It's fine to look at the shadow, but to stir it up for no reason, to just stir it up because it helps to keep people in that fear place, I'm not really into that at all. And so it's important for us to look at all of this, right? And it's uncomfortable to look at all of this. But what begins to happen is we hone our sense of perception and discernment, and we start to lift up and we say, okay, there's nothing going wrong here. And it's okay for this person to believe that, and it's okay for this person to believe that. And it doesn't mean there's not any evidence for these things happening. Could be. It just means, is that where I want to put my time and attention and my focus? Is that the best place for me to spend my time, especially as an empath? Empaths can merge and chameleon ourselves to fit in. And it's like, do I really want to fit into that? And it's about making these conscious choices using that perception. So we come into the masculine and feminine version of discernment, right? So here we have the hermit energy. This masculine going within, holding and shining the light out, paying attention to your light, not all the lights and the shiny stuff and the this and that. There's so much to pay attention to, but are you paying attention to this? Are you shining your light, holding your light? And here's the feminine, right? Going within, feminine intuition. And what is it that we're weaving? We could weave a story about good and evil. We could weave a story about that somebody needs to save us. We could weave a story that, everyone's doing this and everyone's doing that. And again, there may be some aspects of that look true on the surface. But what is the larger picture here? What are we starting to know? And this begins the unification as we go into the Aquarian era. And really what we have here is becoming really grounded and taking the mask off, completing a cycle. We're in the 10 energy here. It's like, okay, I've just been told this since childhood, or I just watched this on the news and I just took it at face value, but now I'm really going to take my mask off. I'm really going to start looking and going, what is it that I want to believe, and where do I want to put my energy, right? And really what this is our ability to have a different key of life. I love this key of life. It's so beautiful. Spinning the Ankh, the key of life. So this is a very ancient symbol, you know, from ancient Egypt. And this really speaks of the cycles, right? The cycles that we go through individually and as human beings, and that it's all reflected within and without. And inside this Ankh is this little space, right? That's a portal. It's a portal, and we get to decide what we put in that space. We can put conspiracy theories, in that space. We can put duality in that space. We can put a war between men and women, a war between those who are wealthy and those who are not. We can put a war between people of color and white people. We can put whatever we want into that space. What cycle is then going to be created because what we have chosen to put here. And what I'm choosing to put there in that space, and the key of life, and my key of life, each one of us, as we decide what we put in that key of life, it matters. Because all of those keys unlock all of the doors collectively. So what are we putting in the door? What door are we opening next? And what I'm choosing to put is that we have the ability to move into unity consciousness. We have ability as human beings, we have the capability to start to learn to appreciate and honor diversity in all forms, to allow people to live and to believe and to be in the way that they want to be. And we are merging into this oneness, right? We're merging into this oneness. This also reminds me of the Aquarian energy, because the symbol for Aquarius is a woman who is holding a singular vessel, and all of the water is pouring out, right? Even though Aquarius is an air sign, and we'll see where that comes up a little bit later in the reading, you know, this is very similar. So all of these archetypes, like whether you're using Egyptian history, using Christian history, or using African history, whether you're using Asian history, the archetypes are the same, right? Here's this feminine energy, this feminine life force energy that knows how to move in the cycles. And there is something that we are pouring out of this portal. We're putting it in and we're pouring it out of this portal. There's no duality here, right? In the key of life, there's no duality. And so what are we going to put there? And that'll be the interesting thing, because what it is a return to innocence. And it doesn't mean that we don't know or we look away from the horrific things that have actually happened on the human plane. It just means that inside of our heart, we return to this place where we no longer need to fight. We no longer need to take power over. This is all about sourcing power from within, right? Look at the enormous power that's sourced from within. This person is not, this being is not trying to control anyone. And that's really the innocence. You know, when we're a child, we don't understand manipulation. We don't understand all those dynamics, right? We're just in that pure space. We take everything for what it is. We don't try to make a whole bunch of other things about it. And this is that return to that. But it does require choices. You know, we have different doors that we can walk through. Here's the weeping, right? This really reminds me of indigenous cultures and some of the atrocities that, or a lot of the atrocities that indigenous cultures and people of color have borne throughout the history of our world. And there's just a deep grief happening right now. And here's the white culture looking away, mostly looking away. Rationalizing, here's the mental energy, sort of rationalizing why this has happened. And yet in the distance, there's a different path. You can see it. And here's the snake and the fire. The snake is sort of the animal of transformation. There is, you know, a fruit here. There's some offering. But like, which of these doors are we going to go through? Are we going to continue to hold this dynamic right now? This is duality. But what do we say, and that came up with the Puma, is that there is a third option. There's a third option. And there can be a unification. There can be connection. We can treat human beings equally. We can treat human beings with respect. And that's where we're going next, is just how do we treat every human being as value, as a valuable, worthwhile being? How do we ensure that every human being has their basic needs met? Because when we're in survival mode, we can't contribute our gifts. And so much of our world is in actual physical survival mode, financial survival mode, emotional survival mode. It's time for us to move out of that space as we enter into this new era of consciousness. And what we're doing right now is we're planting seeds. So here comes 3 again, right? That unification energy. And he's just planting seeds. He's a young man. He's hopeful. He's like, okay, I'm going to prepare the soil. I'm going to plant these seeds. And we will see them blossom. We will see it come to fruition. Maybe not in our lifetime, but we will see it come to fruition. And if we want to explore the energy of the solar eclipse, right? So here we have this beautiful sun disk, right? And the Divine Mother, which would be the moon. And here is the solar child. So this is the rising sun, right? The divine solar child is reborn. And what this requires is for all of us to step into and unify 2 different energies within us, our divine feminine and our divine masculine. And we've been very much in what I'll call lower consciousness masculine, contracted masculine, which is about power over, competition, brute force, all those kinds of things. And this is about the rebirthing. So today, through this eclipse, we are having a rebirth of the divine masculine within every person on earth, right? This is a very powerful energy. It's a powerful portal that we're walking through today. The divine feminine's been rising for some time, and we're still working on that. We're still learning what that looks like to stand in our feminine power, to be strong, to be confident, but also nurturing and loving and empathetic. And the divine masculine is being born now. The mother had to come first, and then the son, right? And in you look at this, and in many cultures, there's been multiple images that look like this. There's been the Mother Mary and the baby Jesus. There's been so many different versions of this, but it was the same message. And it wasn't a message about actual physical beings on earth, although it is a message to us as physical beings. It was a message that it's time to come into that divine union, that divine connection. And in the description box of this reading, I have included a link to download a handout. It's basically a self-test, right, that you can take to assess where have you been in your expanded masculine and your expanded feminine, and where have you been in your contracted masculine, your contracted feminine. And it's just information so that you can see that this work actually begins within. The alchemy that we're speaking of begins within. This shifting of lower consciousness feminine and masculine expression into higher consciousness masculine and feminine expression, and the unification of those 2, the balance. If we go back to the scales, alchemy for a long time had been looked at as turning lead into gold, right? That's the overall idea behind it. So we thought that the way we needed to do that was to acquisition resources from our earth and make them into things and then sell them for money, right? This was literally the alchemy, the way that we expressed alchemical processes. And that is it is a valuable tool that we've created, but it's also a lower consciousness tool. And it doesn't mean that we're going to dissolve our economy immediately, but what we're starting to realize is this is a different energy now, this alchemization. And we have the ability within to be a magician, to bridge these 2 energies, and to be making conscious choices, as we saw before. And the next cards that came out was the Queen of Fire and the King of Water, right? So in the feminine tends to be more receptive and more intuitive and more within and more focused on family and nurturing. And in this card, she begins to take back her power to take action from this place, right? When we go within and we trust our intuitive knowing, you see a lot of activation at the higher self, right? A lot of activation. We find our voice. I'll tell you that I have a beautiful kitten and she has a very strong throat chakra. So she's definitely finding her voice as a divine feminine here on earth. But this is about the feminine aspect, realizing that sometimes we need to take action. We need to stand. It's not a passive energy. This is an assertive feminine energy. And as the masculine, this is about tapping into those emotions. Many men in our cultures and our societies have been taught and socialized that they need to be strong and stoic and not show any emotion, and they're not tapped into this. And that has caused a lot of issues on our planet. I'm just saying, it's caused a lot of issues on our planet. It's caused a lot of issues in relationships and in the greater society, because men are working on what does it mean to be in that loving, nurturing, protective energy, and not just the fire. So in fact, the alchemy is that we are learning how to express both of those aspects, right? The taking action is really vital, and going within is really vital. And both of those things have to work in conjunction as we continue on with this union. And so here we begin to see this union, right? We're very grounded into the earth. And every single chakra, there's a lot of activation here at what I'll call the sacral chakra, which is the chakra of partnership of that masculine, feminine. It's like right between the root and the sacral. It's that masculine, feminine coming together. And then the wings are opening, and then here's the masculine, feminine element on the spiritual level, the divine and the divine masculine and feminine. And so this is that unification. Right? This is this unity consciousness that we're coming into as we enter the age of Aquarius. And what that requires is a really strong sense of self, right? That even when there are things on the outside that are going, and I want to be fear-based, and I want to bring you back into the shadow, and I want you to focus on this duality, you see this duality, and she's like, no, I'm focusing on unity, okay? From the heart. And there's peace. Here's the 3 again, right? We're creating that peace. We're creating all of that abundance, all of the blossoming of those seeds. This is what's required, my friends, to do this work. And the Aquarian energy is air. So some of the final cards that came out are really related to that. So we have the 9 of air, right? The 9 of air. And you see in this card, there's enormous activation here in her mental center. And this is really about our mindset. What are we choosing to believe? Which narrative are we choosing to spend our time and energy on? Because first it comes into our mental center, we process it, and then it gets into an emotional place, and then it seeps into our body, and then it seeps into all of our relationships, and it seeps into everything that we do. So what is it that we're bringing in? What is it we're bringing in? I'm not suggesting that we don't face what's happening. I'm suggesting that we look at what's happening from a different perspective, a different viewpoint. And here you see that her hands, it's hard to see, but her hands have been tied by this mental energy, these old mental habits, these old belief systems we have. And yet she has the power of healing, right? She has the power of healing, so she can release herself at any time. And this is the solar eclipse's invitation to us to begin doing that unification of our inner divine masculine or divine feminine. And now we are ready. This is like a teenager, right? So we have been as a collective and many people individually in really that adolescent energy, sort of an immature energy. It's all about me. I don't want to have to, deal with the collective. I don't want to have to face that we actually have problems, larger problems on earth that, that doesn't affect me. I've had lots of conversations with people on social media about this recently. They're like, well, this thing doesn't affect me. Okay. But I see on your profile, you have 2 beautiful children. And what kind of future do you want them to grow up in? What do you want for them? Because what affects me affects you and everyone else. So this is where we start to realize it's not just about me, like I'm a part of this collective energy. And it's time for me to look at that shadow, not get wallowed down in. You see that it's still very high vibrational energy, but it's time to look at it, face it, step in, take action from that deeply caring, nurturing feminine space, be reflective from that very deeply divine masculine space. And the last card that I wanted to share with you just had such a beautiful message. And this is the 40, which is the 4. So it is balance, right? We come back to that balance point. A lot of wisdom. We see this rainbow energy here. Unity consciousness, right? And this is the sorceress of light, right? Coming into the sorceress of light. When energy becomes stagnant, we can struggle. This doesn't mean we abstain from rest, because true rest allows energy to circulate throughout our being. This is why we emerge from rest feeling refreshed and renewed. Movement to circulate energy means flowing in relationship with our minds, our bodies, and our souls, trusting our inner rhythms. Most of our modern lifestyles make it difficult to live an honest relationship with the mind and body. It can be tricky to find the time and place to authentically and spontaneously honor our needs for expression and flow, to summon our wisdom and creativity to find the way forward. Hayakawa says we must. We must be willing to move within the storm wisdom within us, or we shall be moved by the storm wisdom around us, right? So we've been in this storm, this collective outward storm. We have to be able to go within and do that work inside and bring ourselves in as often as possible into that unification, in order to not be buffeted and moved and influenced by all the things that are happening around us. We will be moved by those events which startle us from our routine when we fall asleep, rather than resting and living. Give yourself permission to explore a more authentic relationship with yourself, and trust that in the process, the changes that will happen, and sometimes those changes will include how we live and work, where we live, whom we share our lives, will be healing. And so this is just such an important day for planet Earth. I am, of course, deeply impacted by all the things that are happening in our world. And yet I'm also holding this sacred container and lifting up just a little bit, not spiritual bypassing, but just lifting up a little bit to say there is something really profound happening here. There's such an amazing opportunity. And it requires us to do this inner work. And it requires us to do the work in the outer world. Because just resting and isolating gets us into that old feminine energy of passivity. And just doing and pushing and taking power over gets us into that old energy of the lower contracted masculine. But when we really take the time to do this work here, individually, in our partnerships and our friendships and collectively, then our world is ready to move into the age of Aquarius. And we can leave behind all these old stories, the conspiracies, the blaming, the finger pointing, and actually come out of that teenage energy where we need to bully each other and we need to make people wrong and we need to fight and we need to be defensive and we need to do all these things. And we can actually step into spiritual adulthood. And it is time, my friends, to step into spiritual adulthood. Each of you will decide to make that journey when you are ready. But this is your invitation today to really begin to do this work, to address the shadow and the storm that is within you, to begin integrating your mind and your body and your soul, to begin making conscious choices about the relationships you're engaging in, the work that you're doing in the world, how you show up, how you participate, how much you need to rest to renew yourself, and honoring those cycles. We're entering a time, and that transition time is so uncomfortable, and I get it, I so get it. There are times when I'm so uncomfortable in all of this. And yet this is so valuable, and we must transition through this. We must look at all of these things. It's vitally important for us to move forward, for us to have a different kind of future. So thank you for holding that container. I feel you. I see you. I can sense you doing your work out there in the outer world, in the inner world. Thank you so much for being who you are, for coming here at this time to be a way shower, to open the door and say, come on in. It's time for the new era. It's time for a new level of consciousness. And we're ready. We're ready. Everything is unfolding as it should. Namaste, my friends.